Chris, an easygoing guy, had always been a fan of suburban life. The quiet neighborhood, the neatly trimmed lawns, and the family-friendly vibe. It was the perfect place to call home. Everything seemed peaceful, with the only disturbances being the occasional barking dog or a lawnmower running early in the morning. But that was before Karen, the neighborhood's infamous HOA enforcer, decided that she'd be the one to make life difficult for him. At first, it wasn't anything too big, just the usual HOA complaints. Your mailbox is slightly off-center, or your hedges need trimming. No big deal, right? But then, Chris noticed something strange happening every week. His trash can, neatly placed on the curb for collection, would mysteriously be knocked over. It didn't happen just once, it happened every single week. Without fail. Chris wasn't sure who was behind it at first. Maybe it was a neighbor's dog, or perhaps kids running around. But then one morning, he saw Karen strolling past his house just as he was heading out. She gave the trash can a quick, dismissive shove with her foot, sending it tipping over. Chris couldn't believe it. She was doing it on purpose. Karen wasn't your average neighbor. She was a stickler for rules, constantly lurking around, looking for something to complain about. If it wasn't the trash cans, it was the slightest imperfection in the neighborhood. She would always be out inspecting lawns, pointing out violations, and talking to anyone who would listen about how the whole rules must be followed to the letter. Chris had had several awkward run-ins with her. Once, she knocked on his door to tell him his grass was a little too tall, an observation that was as ridiculous as it was unnecessary. But it wasn't just the lawn, it was the trash, the curbside decor, and even the way Chris parked his car. If it was wrong in Karen's eyes, she wasn't afraid to let him know. And now, it was the trash can. It had become an ongoing joke, except it wasn't funny. Every Wednesday morning, Chris would come out to find the mess scattered all over his driveway, courtesy of Karen's little adjustments. The frustration was mounting. One particular Tuesday, Chris had just finished his morning coffee when he saw Karen walking down the street again. As if on cue, she approached his trash can, gave it a little nudge, and boom, it tipped over. The trash spilled across the curb and into the street. This time, Chris snapped. He had had enough. He walked out onto the front porch, looked Karen dead in the eyes, and in his best polite but firm voice, said, "Karen, can you stop knocking over my trash can?" She simply smiled, shrugging. "You shouldn't have left it out like that. It's in the way." Chris felt a flash of irritation rise in him, but he bit his tongue. He knew getting into a shouting match wasn't going to solve anything. He returned inside, feeling helpless. But then something clicked. This wasn't just a small inconvenience anymore. This was a battle of wills, and Chris wasn't going to lose. That night, Chris sat down and started brainstorming ways to get back at Karen, but not just any way. He didn't want to escalate things or make it obvious. He wanted to outsmart her, to make her regret ever messing with his trash cans in the first place. An idea began to form in his mind. What if he replaced his regular trash can with one that would drive Karen crazy, without her realizing at first? He hopped online, doing a little research. What he found was brilliant: a high-tech motion-sensing trash can. The can was designed to make loud, obnoxious sounds whenever it was moved or disturbed. But Chris didn't stop there. He also found a device that would release a noxious odor whenever it was knocked over, just a burst of something unpleasant. The idea was simple: install a trash can that looked totally normal but would be an absolute nightmare if Karen decided to knock it over again. Chris ordered the trash can and the odor-releasing gadgets, eagerly awaiting their arrival. The trash can finally arrived, and Chris couldn't wait to set it up. He attached the sensors, programmed the noise, and inserted the odor packets. The can sat there on his porch, unassuming. From a distance, it looked like any other trash can. But Chris knew it was about to change everything. The next morning, he placed the new trash can out on the curb, and sure enough, Karen came strolling down the street just as she always did. Chris watched through his window, barely able to contain his excitement. She eyed the trash can, assessing it. A slight smirk crossed her face. Without hesitation, she kicked it, tipping it over. The noise was immediate and deafening, a loud, screeching siren that echoed down the street. Karen jumped back in surprise, her eyes wide. But that wasn't the worst of it. The scent hit her next. A foul, pungent smell filled the air, and she gagged, stumbling back a few steps. Karen looked around, confused and visibly disgusted, not sure what had just happened. Chris watched, trying his best not to laugh, as Karen attempted to upright the trash can, triggering the noise again. She was clearly rattled. But instead of making a scene, she quickly hurried away. For the next few days, Karen seemed on edge. Chris couldn't help but notice how she would cross the street whenever she got near his house, carefully avoiding the trash can. But one morning, she couldn't resist. She came back again, trying a different approach. This time, instead of kicking the can, she tried to sneak up from behind and quietly tip it over without triggering the sensors. It didn't work. As soon as the can shifted, the loud siren blared, and the foul smell filled the air once again. Karen threw her hands in the air, exasperated. She muttered to herself, looking around to see if anyone had witnessed her struggle. But Chris was safe behind his window, enjoying every second of the quiet victory. After several failed attempts, Karen stopped coming near Chris' house altogether. She had given up, realizing she was no match for the clever trash can Chris had installed. The neighborhood slowly returned to its usual peace, and Chris was finally able to put the whole situation behind him. The best part, Karen never even figured out who was behind it. She probably assumed it was some prankster or a mysterious neighbor who just didn't want to deal with her. As for Chris, he walked past his trash can every week with a sense of smug satisfaction. It wasn't just about the trash, it was about taking control of a situation that had frustrated him for far too long. He had outsmarted Karen, and that was a victory worth celebrating.